if you've had enough of that, sorry, you're going to have to live through another election cycle where the corporate media is throwing around these same concepts, these same terms, accusing everything of being blamed on Russia. And the reason I know that is because they're already doing it. They're already saying it. Here from NBC, just this week, is an article headline, Russia's 2024 election interference has already begun. They're not saying it's coming. They're saying it's already begun, which is another way of saying that their tactic of protecting Joe Biden by accusing everyone of being a Kremlin agent and every critical word about Joe Biden being Russian disinformation, that's what has already begun. Quote, Moscow is spreading disinformation about Joe Biden and other Democrats to lessen U.S. military aid to Ukraine and U.S. support for NATO. Former officials and cyber experts say, quote, U.S. officials and experts are most concerned. I'm sorry, who's most concerned? Oh, don't worry, it's U.S. officials and experts. The people have an incredibly long and storied history of telling the truth, of being incredibly reliable in everything they say. When you hear from corporate media that U.S. officials and experts are saying something, there's one thing you know, it's you can take it to the bank. It's filled with integrity and truth. And what they're saying now is the following, quote, U.S. officials and experts are most concerned that Russia could try to interfere in the election through a, quote, deepfake audio or video using artificial intelligence tools or through a, quote, hack and leak, such as the politically damaging theft of internal Democratic Party emails by Russian military intelligence operatives in 2016. Now, just look at what they did there. First of all, they're saying one of the dangers is that we could have a deep fake audio or video. So if, for example, there appears a video or an audio of Joe Biden talking to Hunter Biden about a bribe or some other scheme, you're already primed to dismiss it as a deep fake by artificial intelligence perpetrated on you by Russian military intelligence operatives. But then there's a second category that they're warning about, which is a hack and leak, such as the politically damaging theft of internal DNC emails by Russian military intelligence operatives in 2016. Now, there's kind of a slight difference between these two categories. For example, a fake audio or video would actually be fabricated. But the emails that came from the DNC and John Podesta's email inbox were completely authentic and genuine. They shed a lot of light on what Hillary Clinton and the DNC were. In other words, one is false and one is true. And what they want to do is prime you to anticipate that anything you hear that's derogatory about Joe Biden, you just immediately put it into the category of things that you should ignore because they come from Russia, and therefore are things that you should disregard, even if they're true. What actually happened in the history of the US media, and there was just somebody from the New York Times who got fired for his role in publishing the heretical column during Black Lives Matter by U.S. Senator Tom Cotton, the Republican of Arkansas, who called on the U.S. government to use military force to crush the protest movement, to quell it on the grounds that it was violent. And the two senior New York Times editors who were responsible for publishing that in the New York Times, even though it was a U.S. senator who wrote it, got fired. And one of them recently wrote an article in The Atlantic this week, in fact, saying that his experience at the New York Times was that during the run-up to the 2020 election, U.S. media outlets were completely unwilling to publish anything that might reflect negatively in any way on Joe Biden because they were so desperate to ensure that Donald Trump lost the election. And that was exactly my experience as well. I quit The Intercept in October of 2020, right before the election, because of it. And any person who's honest will admit that the media was kind of willing to be critical of Hillary Clinton in 2016, primarily because they just assumed she was going to win. Everybody thought she was going to win. And so nobody thought it mattered. And then when Trump won and Hillary lost, media outlets had a complete meltdown. They completely transformed themselves. They said, we can never do this again. We can never report negatively again on someone running against Donald Trump. Even if it's our job as journalists to do that, we have to prioritize our role as activists, as Democratic Party partisan activists, because there's nothing, not even our journalistic duties, more important than ensuring that Donald Trump loses the election. And that's what journalism did in 2020. It completely renounced whatever residual notion of journalistic duty there was. And in 2024, it's going to be even worse. They've convinced themselves that Donald Trump is worse. This is like the more dictatorial version of him. He might do things like try and imprison his political opponents. Can you imagine living in a country where that's done? Or politicizing intelligence? God, must that be like? So they're saying Donald Trump is so evil he might try and prosecute his political opponents, or he might try and politicize intelligence. And therefore, we have to do everything possible to protect Joe Biden, including making sure that any negative reporting is immediately dismissed as coming from the Kremlin. Quote, NBC goes on, the type of pro-Russia online propaganda campaigns that thrived on Twitter and Facebook ahead of the 2016 US presidential election is now routine on every major social media platform, though it's rare for individual accounts to go as viral now as they once did. Moscow and its proxies have long sought to exploit divisions in American society, but experts and former officials said, wait, who said? Oh, okay, so you know what's coming is true because experts and former officials said it, that, quote, Trump's false claims that the 2020 election was stolen, the country's deepening political polarization, and sharp cuts in disinformation and election integrity teams at X and other platforms provide fertile ground to spread confusion, division, and chaos. And what they mean by confusion, division, and chaos is anything that challenges their political views. That it's urgent that the war in Ukraine continue, that the U.S. should fund it, that Donald Trump must lose, that Joe Biden must win. Anything that contravenes that, they regard automatically as Russian disinformation or things that are coming from Russia and its proxies. So that was NBC News. Here is the Washington Post, reading as always from the exact same script. From February 26, Russia looms over yet another Trump presidential campaign. Quote, new praise of Moscow and a refusal to condemn Putin underscore the former president's persistent admiration of the country. I mean, honestly, I'm exhausted reading that. Just the words in that sequence have been so overused. They spent all of 2016 accusing Trump of loving Vladimir Putin. And he went on to crush Hillary Clinton. They spent all the first presidential term accusing Trump of the same thing, and then in the 2020 election. And Trump, despite facing some of the worst conditions a elected incumbent president can face, including financial decline as a result of the COVID lockdowns and the like, came very close to winning that election. So the fact that they think this is going to work again, or work for the first time, like Americans are going to go to the polls based on who loves Putin or who doesn't, when polls show not only Trump leading in all the key swing states, but even now Trump leading, even if he's convicted of a crime. There's been recent polling data saying even if he's convicted of a crime, we would still vote for Trump. The fact that they're so desperate and out of ideas that this is all they can do is actually pathetic. But as we've seen, it can have real world and very dangerous effects, such as continuing to pump up American fixations on Russia. Here's the Washington Post. Quote, the former President Trump has repeatedly expressed a fascination with Russia. There is definitely someone fascinated with Russia, but I don't think it's Trump. Quote, lavish praise on Putin and refused to stand up to the Russian president on a range of issues, from interfering in the 2016 presidential election to invading Ukraine almost exactly 2 years ago. Now, let's just remember two things. When Russia annexed Ukraine, they did that in 2014 when Barack Obama was the president. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, they did that when Joe Biden was the president. There were no invasions during Trump's presidency by Russia, no attempts to seize more territory. This all happened under a Democratic president, two Democratic presidents, not Donald Trump. On top of which, as we've been through many times before, it was Barack Obama who refused to send lethal arms to Ukraine, and Trump did that. So all of this is fiction, on top of being paranoid. Quote, Trump's reluctance to forcefully confront Russia and his regular adulation of Putin have long raised the question, with Trump, why do, quote, all roads lead to Putin? As then Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat from California, memorably asked in 2019 during a contentious cabinet room meeting. These are news articles saying, as Nancy Pelosi memorably asked, what does Russia have on Trump? Now, they unleashed Robert Mueller and his team of A-list prosecutors with unlimited subpoena power and unlimited resources for 18 months. And not only did they find no evidence of any kind to support this insane, deranged, demented, paranoid conspiracy theory that the Russians have blackmail power over Trump, Mueller barely mentioned it in the report because it was something he didn't even think was worth dignifying. And yet the most partisan Democrats continue to insist that this is not just a story, but the most important story. And if you think I'm exaggerating, here is the Boston College history professor, Heather Cox Richardson, who has become the most popular writer on Substack by churning out just one article after the next that's just anti-Trump agitprop, pro-DNC, talking points. She makes $5 million from all the subscriptions that earns, because feeding liberals paranoia about Trump and Russia is by far the easiest way to get rich overnight in politics, and she has done that very well, very successfully. And here's what she tweeted today, quote, "Very important article from Josh Marshall at the Talking Points memo. Extra points for, quote, Russian dirt safari. The more I think about it, the more it seems the main story of the past decade has been Russian disinformation to undermine U.S. democracy." Just imagine how insulated in a partisan bubble you have to be to believe that the main story confronting the United States is Russian disinformation and Russian attempts to subvert American democracy. But this is not a tactic. This is what Democrats really believe. Here is former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on with former Biden spokesperson, and still Biden spokesperson, she just works at MSNBC now, Jen Psaki. And they were talking about, you'll never guess, Russia. And here's what Nancy Pelosi said. This is not in 2016 or 2018 before the Mueller report came out. This is just last week on MSNBC.
Putin is probably the richest person in the world. Probably the richest person in the world. Forget all these ratings that people have. The richest person in the world. He's also the most, well, not the most evil, stiff competition for that honor, but nonetheless among the top 3 or 4 most evil people in the world. What does he have on Donald Trump that he have to constantly world?
Look at Jen Psaki's face as Nancy Pelosi spreads this insane conspiracy theory in 2024 that Donald Trump is being blackmailed by Vladimir Putin. Look at the smug, knowing, arrogant smirk on that face of hers. Jen Psaki was one of the people who spread the CIA lie right before the 2020 election that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. They don't learn because they don't want to learn. They realize that this constant paranoid Russia script helps the Democratic Party win, or they believe it will. And so as Nancy Pelosi, look at the face already just on the screen, this smirk, this nauseating smirk as this old lady spews this completely demented conspiracy that has been debunked over and over. Look at the Mueller report. Where is the evidence that Donald Trump has anything, or Vladimir Putin has anything on Donald Trump, let alone has been systematically blackmailing him to serve Russia's interests? And they put Pelosi on to say this with no evidence. These are the people who insist. They hate disinformation. They hate conspiracy theories. Nobody spreads it more.
What does he have on Donald Trump that he have to constantly be catering to Putin? Telling Putin, go into these countries, NATO countries. NATO was there to stop Russia, to keep Russia out. They have been successful for nearly 75 years. We will celebrate that security success. And then we have, what's his name? I usually have him nameless, saying he doesn't support NATO and encouraging Russia to invade NATO countries.
He who shall not be named. I know Voldemort well, so there's another guy kind of like him. What do you think? We're all wondering this question.
Oh my God, that's so cutting and so effective and so mature. And they won't name Donald Trump as they spend all their time talking about him. How incredibly clever. Trump's comments as always, are being distorted. What he said was that, look, if we're going to have NATO, the Europeans need to pay their fair share. Why do we have to pay so much more to protect Europe? And they need to pay up. And if they don't, we're going to pull out of NATO. Or we're going to tell the Russians, we're not in NATO anymore. You can go do what you want. We're not going to protect Europe if they don't pay. And so, of course, they try to turn this into some like literal policy platform that Trump is encouraging Russia to go attack NATO, as opposed to a hyperbolic way of saying that the Europeans have to pay their fair share. And it isn't true that NATO was created to prevent Russia from going into Europe. NATO was created to prevent the Soviet Union from going into Europe, because the Soviet Union was a empire that was looking to expand its territory, had taken over all of Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union hasn't existed for more than 30 years. It doesn't exist any longer. And yet they continue to act like the Cold War is still going on, even though they were the ones, when Mitt Romney said Russia was our #1 geopolitical threat, who mocked Mitt Romney for being trapped in the Cold War. That was in the 2020 debate, the 2012 debate, when President Obama mocked Romney for warning about Russia by saying, oh, the 1980s are calling, they want their foreign policy back. And these people are completely trapped in the Cold War, where they're trying to encourage people to believe that Russia, which Obama mocked as a regional power at best, with an economy smaller than Italy's, a country we don't have to worry about and to go to war with, is now somehow this, not only a threat to the United States, but the greatest threat. This is the biggest story there, is what Russia is doing to the United States. They want Americans to think, with all their struggles and all their problems, that the biggest concern they have is Vladimir Putin and Russia. Just to show you how instinctive this is, how demented it is in Democratic Party liberal politics, here was Nancy Pelosi at the end of January on CNN, when being asked about Israel and U.S. support for Israel and the jeopardy that might put Joe Biden in with angry leftists who are mad at them for financing the war in Gaza, and the protesters who are denouncing Joe Biden. Remember what Nancy Pelosi said about them.
They're in front of my house all the time. So I have a feeling for what feelings they have. But we have to think about what we're doing. And what we have to do is try to stop the suffering in Gaza. This is women and children, people who don't have a place to go. So let's address that. But for them to call for a ceasefire is Mr. Putin's message. Mr. Putin's message. Make no mistake, this is directly connected to what he would like to see. Same thing with Ukraine. It's about Putin's message. I think some of these protesters are spontaneous and organic and sincere. Some, I think, are connected to Russia. And I say that having looked at this for a long time now, as you know.
You think some of these protests are Russian plants?
I say they're plants. I think some financing should be investigated. And I want to ask the FBI to investigate that.
So, just to be clear there, Nancy Pelosi is angry that there are protesters outside her house. She's one of the most powerful politicians of the country, and so they're protesting outside her house because she and Joe Biden support and are financing the war, the Israeli war in Gaza. Now, her response to that is to say, oh, I think these people are Russian agents. They're doing the bidding of Vladimir Putin. They might even be paid for by the Kremlin. And I think the FBI, I'm going to get the FBI to go investigate them. I'm going to call the FBI and investigate these leftist protesters who are angry at the Democratic Party because they're probably doing Vladimir Putin's bidding. Because somehow it's Vladimir Putin who cares so much about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it's he who wants a ceasefire, and therefore anybody who is against U.S. financing of the war in Israel must be a Kremlin agent. You see how reflexively they label anyone that disagrees with them or that criticizes them as Russian agents, to the point that she even calls on the FBI like it's her personal security force. Go investigate these people, these Americans who are exercising their First Amendment right to protest. Go investigate them. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.